We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Amud Aleph in Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 68a. On the previous Amud, the Gemara was discussing the line in the Mishnah which said, Ein hagonev achar haganev, that if a person steals from a ganev, that person is not going to pay kefil. And Rav said that is only true before Yish. But if the first ganev steals it and then the owner is miyayish, so then the first ganev actually acquires the item, and the second ganev is then stealing it really from the first ganev who is now the owner of the item, and therefore the second ganev would in fact pay kefil to the first ganev. And Rav Sheshes asked on Rav from a brisa. The brisa says that Rabbi Akiva says, why is it that you pay 4 or 5 times the amount in a situation of slaughtering or selling by the sheep or by the shore? And the brisa says, Rabbi Akiva says, the reason why you pay 4 or 5 times the amount is because nishtarish bechet, the person has deepened his sin, he's let it take root, he's essentially not only stolen the item, but now he's getting benefit from the stolen item. And so Rav Sheshes analyzes this brisa. What is this brisa talking about? If we're talking about before Yush, so then mi'ika nishtarish, so is it really true that it's nishtarish in the chet? Has he really allowed the sin to take root? As Rashi says, mi'ika nishtarish halo ahanu maisav. What he's doing is not helping at all. Deshinoi reshus sheshinhu me reshuso l'reshus lokeach. Let's say he sells the item. It could be either be shchit or mechira. So let's say in a situation where he sells the item, that shinoi reshus, where it goes from his reshus, the reshus lokeach, to the reshus of the lokeach, below yish, without yish, lekolaman damar dekani. Nobody says that shinoi reshus alone is going to be a kinyan. Meaning to say, the Gemara's assumption over here is, Rav Shesh's assumption is that nishtarish bechet means to say that it's actually effective what you do. So in the situation where you're selling it, the sale is going to be an effective kinyan. But without yish, the sale would certainly not be an effective kinyan, because shinoi reshus alone is not a kinyan. And so the Gemara continues, Ela la'achar yish. Rather, you have to say that this brisa is talking about after yish, and he sells the item after yish. That's why you have a yish and a shinoi reshus, and therefore his maisim, therefore his action is effective in allowing a kinyan for the lokeach. However, visal kadaitach yish kani. But if you're going to say that yish alone is a kinyan, amay mishalam tashlumi arba v'chamisha. But why would he then pay 4 or 5 times the amount? That wouldn't make any sense. Shalohu toveach, shalohu mocher, because then he's slaughtering his own animal. He's slaughtering the animal that he has already acquired, or he's selling his own animal, so it can't be that yish alone is kona. You see that from this brisa. And Rashi says, la'achar yish da'ahanu maisav. It has to be that this brisa is talking about after yish, where his deeds are effective. Dahashta koni lokeach betarti, because now the lokeach, the one who buys the item from the ganev, is going to acquire it betarti in 2 ways, because they're going to combine yish v'shinoi reshus. The yish and the shinoi reshus will combine to create a kinyan. V'sal gadaydach yish now, if you think that yish alone is a kinyan, ganav amay mishalim arba v'chamisha. Why would the ganav pay arba v'chamisha? Hadmei be'almahu de'isluhu l'baylam gabei v'shalo tavachu machar. All he owes the original owner is money. He just owes damim, and what he's slaughtering or what he's selling is actually his. And so therefore, essentially, Rav Sheshes is asking on Rav, it's not true. Rav said that if there is yish, so then the ganav sheni steals it from the ganav rishon. The ganav rishon already owns it, so the ganav sheni pays kefil to the ganav rishon. That's not true. We see from this brisa that yish alone is not kona. And the Gemara responds, Amri, the sage's answer, Kedo Amar Rava, it's like Rava said, Mimnei Shashana Bechet. Rava said it in a different context. The idea is that he repeated the sin. Hachanami here also, that's really what it means in this brisa, Mimnei Shashana Bechet, that he repeated the sin, as Rashi says, Kedo Amar Rava Lakaman B'Shmait, and Rava is going to say this later on in the Sugi in a different context. Shashana Bechet, the idea over here is that he repeated the sin, meaning, Uliolam Lefnei Yesh, really, this brisa is talking about where he sells it before the Yesh. And so then the question was, if he sells it before the Yesh, so that's not nishtarish achet, because if he's selling it before Yesh, shinoi reshus alone is certainly not a kinyan. It's not going to be an effective kinyan to the lokeach. But no, we really are talking about before Yesh, and it actually is not an effective kinyan. V'avapi delo ahanu maisav. Even though it's not an effective kinyan, even though that which he did, which was just a shinoi reshus, is not really going to cause that the lokeach will acquire it, but still mechayev, he still repeated his sin, he's furthered his sin, and that's why he's chayev the dalid v'hei. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from another brisa, Utavacho o Macharo. Again, the pasuk says that he slaughters it or he sells it, and then he's chayav 4 or 5 times the amount. And the brisa says, Ma tvicha she'ena chozeres. Just like tvicha is something that can't be undone. Obviously, once the animal is killed, you can't bring it back to life. Af mechira, so too when you sell the animal, she'ena chozeres. The point is that it can't be undone. We right now think what we mean to say is that it is a kinyan. Rashi says she'ena chozeres kasal kadaydach tahachi Kamma. Right now we think it means as follows. The lo mechayev elahecha de mechirasa mechira gemura. Person's not only chayev, he's only chayev in a situation where it's a full sale, the kanya lokech, and the lokech actually acquires it. That's what we think the brisa means when it says eina choseres. And so the Gemara now analyzes the brisa. Emas, when are we talking about? When did he sell it? Is it before Yish or after Yish? Ilema lifnei Yish, if you're going to say that it's before Yish, amai eina choseres. So if it's before Yish, why is that eina choseres? Meaning to say, if the sale is done before the yesh, and that's where you pay 4 or 5 times the amount, so then it is choseres. That's not really a full sale, because again, shinoi rishus will not create a kinyan. As Rashi says, amayna choseres, shinoi rishus below yesh mikani. The shinoi rishus without yesh, is that going to be a kinyan? Of course, it is not going to be a kinyan. So therefore, it can't be talking about lifnei yesh. So elal achar yesh. So rather, you'll say that we're talking, when we say that you're chai 4 or 5 times the amount, it's if you sell it after yesh. But that doesn't make sense with yesh kona. If you think that yesh alone is a kinyan, you wouldn't pay daled v'hei there. Amay mishalem daled v'hei. Why would he pay daled v'hei? Shalo toveach, shalo mocher. He's slaughtering his own animal. He's selling his own animal. In other words, it must be that yish alone is not kona, but yish with shinoi rishus is kona, and that's what the Bryce is saying, that it's eina choseres, because yish and shinoi rishus together, that's a kinyan. That's considered to be a real valid sale. And the Gemara answers no. Kedamer of Nachman. It has nothing to do when it says that it has to be eina choseres by the mechir. It has nothing to do with it being a valid kinyan. Rather, it's like Rav Nachman said in a different context. Prat l'shehikne l'shloshim yom. The exclusion is we're excluding. Let's say he just sells it. He just makes it a kinyan for 30 days. Hachanami prat l'shehikne l'shloshim yom. So too here, that's all the brisa means. Eina choseres means literally eina choseres. If he does a sale that's only for 30 days, that would not be good enough for daled v'hei. It has to be a full sale. And Rashi explains, Kedamer of Nachman l'kamen b'shmaitin, again, like Rav Nachman said it in another context further on in the sugya, prat l'shehikne lo l'shloshim yom, and then the Gemara ultimately says, no, the brisa just means to exclude a situation where the kinyan is just a 30-day kinyan. That will not be a situation of daled v'hei. Kilomar, meaning to say, liolam l'fnei yesh, really we're talking before yesh. V'hai eina choseres to katani, when we say it's eina choseres, lo l'mu tehechad lo ahanu masav, we're not excluding a situation where it wasn't a kinyan. T'afagav de lo ahanu chayve rachmona, even if it wasn't really an effective kinyan, the Torah still says you're chayiv daled v'hei hoel v'shana b'chet, since he's like repeated his sin, as we said above. Ela lemute, rather all the brisa means to exclude is the following: heichad lo mochar ganav lelokeach ela lasos b'malacha shloshim yom. Let's say the ganav sold it to the lokeach, but only to work with it for 30 days. To keschiris ba'alma, that's just like a mere rental. That's not going to count for daled v'hei. And the Gemara continues, Meseches, we have a question from the following brisa. Ganav, let's say somebody steals, uva achar v'ganvo, then a second person comes along and steals it from the first ganav. Harishon mishalim tashlume kefel, the first ganav pays kefel to the original owners. V'hasheni eino mishalim ela karen bilvad, and the second person, he only pays the principal, he does not pay kefel. That is a case of stealing from a ganav, and there is no kefel, as we said in the Mishnah. Ganav u'machar, let's say a person steals and sells it. Uva achar v'ganvo, and then somebody else comes and steals it from the lokeach, from the one who bought it. Harishon mishalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha, the first person pays 4 or 5 times the amount because he stole it and he sold it. V'hasheni mishalim tashlumi kefel, and the second person pays kefel because the person who acquired it from the ganav, that person is considered to be the real owner. That was a real acquisition, so he has to pay kefel to that person, to that lokeach. Ganav v'tavach, let's say the person stole it and slaughtered it. Uvo acher v'ganvo, and then somebody else comes and steals that slaughtered animal. Harishon mishalim tashlumi daled v'hei, the first person pays the 4 or 5 times the amount because he stole and slaughtered the animal. V'hasheni eino mishalim tashlumei kefel, and the second person, since he stole from a ganav, he does not pay kefel ela karen bilvad, he only pays the principal. And the Gemara now analyzes the brisa. Katani miya mitziyasa, what does it say in the middle case of this brisa? It says ganav umachar, if he steals it and he sells it, uva'achar v'ganvo, and then somebody comes and steals it from the lokeach. Harishon mishalim tashlumei daled v'hei, the first person pays 4 or 5 times the amount. V'hasheni mishalim tashlumei kefel, and the second person who stole it from the lokeach, he pays kefel. Ema, so when did all of this take place? Meaning to say, was there yish or not? Ilema lifnei yish, if you're going to say that what happened was he stole it and then he sold it before yish. So sheni amai mishalim tashlumei kefel, why would the second person pay kefel for stealing it from the lokeach? Shinoi rishus below yish me'ikol amandam dekani. Shinoi rishus without any yish, does anyone say that's a good acquisition? Meaning the lokeach would not acquire it in that situation. If the person stole it and sold it before yish, the lokeach is not the rightful owner, and the person who steals it from the lokeach would actually not pay kefel in that case. So Elav Shita, rather it's obvious you have to say, in this middle case, la'achar yish, that we're talking about that he stole it, and there was Yish, and then he sold it, and therefore it's a Yish combined with a Shinoi Rishus that allows the Lokeach to be the rightful owner. But Visa Kadaydach Yish Konan, if you're going to say that Yish alone creates the Kinyan, that you don't need the Yish together with the Shinoi Rishus, Amay Mishalim Tashlumi Dalad Vehe, why would that first Ganav pay 4 or 5 times the amount? Didei Hu Dezavan, he sold his own property because he acquired it through Yish. Visu and further, the Katani Reisha, that which we learned in the Reisha of this Brisa. In the first case of the Brisa, it says, Gonav uva'achar v'gonvo, that if the first person steals it, and then a second person comes along and steals it from him, Rishon Meshalim Tashlum Kefel, the first person pays Kefel, V'asheni ein Meshalim Elakaran, and the second person only pays the principal because he's stealing from a Ganav. So Michli Ladasi La'achar Yish Kaimin, we already said in the middle case that we're talking about after Yish. V'sal Kadaitach Yish Konan, now if you think that Yish is a Kinyan, Sheni Amayin Meshalim Elakaran, why does the second person only pay the Karen? That second person should actually pay Kefel because the first Ganav acquired it through Yish. Elalav Shmamino Yish Lo Kani. Rather, don't we see from this Brisa that Yish is not Konev, Akasha L'Rav, and this Brisa is a difficulty on Rav. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, V'tizbra, is it logical to ask a question from this Brisa? Hamitar Tsasahi, do you think this Brisa actually makes sense, that it's an answered Brisa? Ela de Katani Seifa, let's look at what it says in the Seifa of this Brisa. In the Seifa of the Brisa it says, Gana v'tavach, if a person steals and slaughters, Uba'achar v'ganvo, and then somebody comes and steals the slaughtered animal, Rishon Meshalim Tashlumi Arba v'chamisha, the first person pays 4 or 5 times the amount, he stole and slaughtered the animal, V'sheni enu Meshalim Ela Karen, and the second person only pays the Karen, presumably because he stole from a Ganav. But the problem is, does anyone say that Shinoi Maisa, that if the animal changes physically, that it's not a Kinyan? Meaning over here, if the person stole it and slaughtered it, that's a Shinoi Maisa. Through the Shinoi Maisa, he's actually acquired it, and now if a second person comes and steals it, he actually is stealing from the rightful owner, and so he shouldn't just pay the Karen, he shouldn't just pay the principal, he should have to pay double. So that whole case of the Sefer doesn't make any sense. Rather, you have to say as follows. Really, the entire Bryce is talking about before Yish. Has nothing to do with whether Yish is Kona or not. And then what we do is, we reverse the last case of the Bryce with the middle case of the Bryce. The whole force of the question against Rav really came from the middle case, but now we're going to reverse the case. We're going to reverse the second and middle, and the middle to the end. We'll reverse the cases as follows. And the Bryce should read as follows. Ganav u'machar, if a person steals and he sells it, uva'achar v'ganvo, and then somebody comes and steals it from the lokeach, harishon meshalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha, the first person who stole and sold it is going to pay 4 or 5 times the amount, v'hasheni eino meshalim ela karen, and the second person in this case, again, the one who stole it from the lokeach is actually not going to pay kefil, he'll only pay the karen, he'll only pay the principal, the shinoi rishus below yish lo kani, because that's exactly what the Bryce is saying. Shinoi rishus alone without yish is not a kinyan, and the lokeach is not the rightful owner, and therefore he doesn't pay kefil. That's how we change the middle case. And now the end case, gona v'tavach, if the person stole it and slaughtered the animal, uba'achar v'ganvo, and then somebody comes and steals the slaughtered animal, harishon meshalim tashlumi arba v'chamisha, the first person pays 4 or 5 times the amount because he stole and slaughtered the animal, v'hasheni meshalim tashlumi kefil, and the second person will pay kefil in this case, the kanya b'shinoi maisa, because there was a kinyan, the Ganav acquired the animal when he slaughtered it through a shinoi maisa. And the Gemara continues, Rapapa says, Liolam lo seipach, really you don't have to do any changing of anything, any reversing of anything in this Brisa. And Seifa Beis Shammai, the very end of the Brisa actually is following the opinion of Beis Shammai. Again, the whole question from the Seifa was, isn't there a Shinoi Maisa? And so the first Ganav, that Ganav actually acquired the item, and so the second person should have to pay kefil. No, we're following Beis Shammai, the Amri Shinoi b'makoma omed. Beis Shammai say that the Shinoi is nothing, it's not considered significant, it stays in its place, and therefore Shinoi Maisa, according to Beis Shammai, is not a kinyan, and that's why it says at the very end of the Brisa, again, that second person who steals the slaughtered animal is stealing it from a Ganav, and there is no kefil. But the Gemara says if you're not reversing, if you're not changing anything, if so, kasha reisha u'mitziyasu Rav. So then we're back to our original question on Rav, because we're going to say the middle case is talking la'achar yeyish, the reisha is talking la'achar yeyish, and then it would certainly imply that yeyish is not kona, yeyish is only kona together with shinoi rishus. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Zvid says, li'olam kula lifnei yeyish. Really, we could say again, this entire brisa is talking about before yeyish, but if it's talking about before yeyish, so then shinoi rishus alone certainly is not a kinyan. So how do we understand the case of the the lokeach. V'hacha b'mayaskin, and here what is the case? Shenesiyayishu habaylim bilokeach v'lo nesiyayishu beganev. What happened was the original owner hadn't yet been miyayish at the time of the ganev, meaning shenesiyayishu habaylim bilokeach. The original owner only gave up after it was sold to the lokeach. They had no yish when it was given to the ganev. Dahavala yish v'shinoi reshus. So what you have here really is there's a yish and a shinoi reshus. Really, as we're about to say, according to this answer, we're following Rav. So yish alone really is enough to be kona. And the Gra actually takes out this entire line of the Havala Yish V'Shina Rishus, and rather you just continue reading from here. V'lo teima mishum devo'in on Yish V'Shina Rishus. Don't say that the idea is that you require both Yish and Shina Rishus for the Lokech to be Kona. That's actually not true. Really, we're following Rav. Ela afilu b'yeyish l'chudei nami kani. But really, even by Yeyish alone, there would be a kinyan gabe ganev by the ganev. But if there's a kinyan by the ganev with Yeyish alone, so then we have a problem, because then it's the ganev, he's selling his own property, so he's not going to pay 4 or 5 times the amount. You're just not going to have a case where they both end up paying. You're not going to have a case where the Ganav Rishon pays 4 or 5 times the amount for selling it, and the Ganav Sheni pays kefil, unless you say the Yish came later. If the Yish came later, then it works out, because then the Ganav Rishon sells it to the Lokeach. His sale at the time that he sells it is Mechayev im Daled V'Hei, because there was no Yish yet, and then there's a Yish, so now if somebody steals it from the Lokeach, he has to pay kefil. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. Itmar, it was stated, we have the following machlokas amuroim hamocher lifnei yeyish. Let's say somebody steals the animal and sells it before there is yeyish. Rav Nachman Amar Chayev. Rav Nachman says the person is chayev 4 or 5 times the amount, because again he stole and sold the animal. Rav Sheisha Amar Potter. Rav Sheisha says he's potter because it's lifnei yeyish and the sale is not an effective kinyan, and therefore not mechayev the person daled v'hei. Rav Nachman Amar Chayev. Rav Nachman says the person is obligated, the person is chayev umachro amar rachmana, because the pasuk says that he sells it, v'azavin, and that's exactly what he did here. He sold it, so he's chayev daled v'hei, loshna lifnei yeyish, loshna la'achar yeyish. It doesn't matter if he sold it before yeyish, it doesn't matter if he sold it after yeyish. Rav Sheisha Amar Potter. Rav Sheisha says in this case, if he sells it before yeyish, he's potter from daled v'hei, chiyuvei la'achar yeyishu. The chiyuv, the obligation to pay daled v'hei, is only after yeyish, the ahanu maisav, where the sale is effective. Aval lifnei yeyish to lo ahanu maisav, but if he sells it before yeyish, where the sale is not effective, lo mechayev, so then he's not chayev daled v'hei. Dumya de tvicha, because it has to be similar to slaughtering it. Dumya de tvicha ba'inon, it has to be similar. We require that it be similar to tvicha, the hanu maisav, where his action is effective. Obviously, when he shechts it, his action is effective to slaughter the animal, to kill the animal. So too, when he sells it, it has to be a valid kinyan. His action has to be effective. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Sheisha. Rav Sheisha says, Menoa aminola, from where can I show you my position? Again, Rav Sheisha is the one who says that he is potter, that it has to be an effective sale in order to be chayav daled v'hei. The Tanya, because we learned in the Brayso, Amar Rabbi Kiva says, Mipnei ma amra Torah tavachu machar masham daled v'hei. Why does the Torah say that if somebody slaughters or sells the animal, he pays 4 or 5 times the amount? Mipnei shenishtarish b'chet, because he's allowed the sin to take root. Now that has the implication that the sale is effective. Emas, so when are we talking about? Ilema lifnei yeyish, if we're talking before yeyish, mi'ika nishtarish, has the sin taken root, the sale is not effective. That wouldn't be called nishtarish. Rather, it must be we're talking after Yish, and if we're talking after Yish, so then it has to be that the reason why only after Yish we say that the person is chayav daled v'hei again is because then it is an effective sale through the combination of Yish and Shinoi Rishus. And again, you see, if it would be before Yish, there would be no chiyuv of daled v'hei. And the Gemara answers, as we said above, Amar Rava says, Mimnei sheshana b'chet. It shouldn't be in the Braisa, Mimnei shenishtarish b'chet. It's simply Mimnei sheshana b'chet, because he's repeated the chet, he's repeated the sin, and therefore it would work even if the sale is not effective. That is still a reason to say, that's still why the Torah says the person has to pay daled v'hei. And the Gemara continues, Tashma Kamma, another proof with Tvachim Macharo. It says that he slaughters the animal or he sells the animal, then he pays 4 or 5 times the amount. Matvicha she'ena choseres, just like slaughtering is something that is never going to be returned undone. Af mechira she'ena choseres, so to the sale cannot be undone. And again, the Gemara right now thinks that means that it is an effective, valid kinyan. So Emas, so when did he sell it? Ilay malifnei yeyish, if he sold it before yeyish, amai ena choseres. Why is that ena choseres? That is choseres. That can be undone. It's not an effective kinyan. Elul achar yeyish, rather it must be that he's selling it after yeyish. Ushma minach yuval achar yeyish, when you see that the chiyuv when you sell the animal is only after yeyish, when it's an effective kinyan. And the Gemara says, as we said above, Tir Gemara Kamma Rav Nachman interprets it as follows: Prat l'shehikna lo l'shloshim yom. It really doesn't mean to exclude a situation where the kinyan is not effective. That might not make a difference. What it's saying is that if he does it a sale for only 30 days, as we said above, so that's what the brisa actually means. It means if it's a sale for only 30 days, it's not going to be mechayiv the dalad v'hei, the 4 or 5 times the amount. And Rashi here gives a nice summary of all the opinions. Utlosa amoroi ninu. It ends up being a 3-way machlokas amoroim on this issue. Rav savar yish kani. Rav says that yish alone is kona. Hilkach lo mechayev ela b'lifnei yish. Therefore, if he sells it, the chiyuv is only going to be, or even if he slaughters it, according to Rav, the chiyuv is only going to be before yish. De'ila achar yish, because if he does it, if he sells it or slaughters it after yish, shalohu toveyach umocher. So then he's actually slaughtering or selling his own animal, and there would not be a chiyuv of dalid v'hei. So it has to be lifnei yish, according to Rav. Rav Nachman and Rav Shesha savri yish greda lo koni. Rav Nachman and Rav Shesha, they say yish alone is not kona. Umishum hachi la'achar yish mechayiv, and that's why if he does slaughter or sell it after yish, certainly he would be chayiv the dalid v'hei umiu b'ha pligi. But they're arguing as follows, meaning Rav Nachman and Rav Shesha argue as follows. The Rav Nachman lo boya hanumaisav. Rav Nachman says it doesn't need to be an effective sale. Hilkach afilu lifnei yeyish greda nami chayiv. Therefore, even if it would be before yeyish and all you would have is the Shina and Rishus, which is not an effective kinyan, still, even in that case, according to Rav Nachman, the person would be chayav dalid v'hei. For Rav Sheshes by mechira gemura, but Rav Sheshes requires it to be a valid kinyan, a full sale, and therefore he says the person's only chayav dalid v'hei if he sells it after yeyish. And the Gemara continues, V'af Rebbe Lozer savar chiyuvei la'achar yeyishu. Rebbe Lozer also holds that the chiyuv of dalid v'hei is only if he sells it after yeyish. To Amar Rebbe Lozer, because Rebbe Lozer says, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Samech Ches Amud Beis.